Okay, welcome to the Implementation Advisory Subcommittee on in-kind donations. I actually think, you know, we just want to make sure we're following the procedure exactly to the T. So I think we do have to start these meetings off by formally, with a formal vote to begin them too, and then formal vote to adjourn them. Um, and so they are, of
I've
course.
never heard of a formal vote to begin. We have a scheduled, we publicly noticed the meeting.
Yeah, I just, because we formally adjourn them, I want to make sure we're not um, violating any rules by, or on any technicalities by not like formally opening them to.
Okay, I move that we open this meeting.
Okay.
I'll second.
Thanks, Becca.
Mhm.
We have to have a voice vote too. Everything we have to do is a voice vote. We can't do emojis here.
Okay.
Sure. So are you running the meeting, Daniel? Then you have to call for the vote. So
I
if you're
would,
in
yeah.
charge of running, okay, great.
Yes. So committee member Higgins. Do you all prefer committee member? Is that
No, I don't. I prefer my first name.
Felisa,
I.
Becca,
Aye.
and James?
Aye.
All right, thank you all for humoring me there. Uh, okay. Well, I sent it on the agenda. We might not need to take the full amount of time today, because the real crux of the conversation is around the charter amendment. Last time we all met, there was a discussion about whether or not a charter recommendation, whether or not the full IEC and should take on a charter amendment recommendation too. And so after we discussed it, I think upon your request, we then talked about in the full IAC meeting and make sure everyone's on the same page with the dynamics and the constrictions we have in place. And then I've been talking with every single subcommittee about whether their subcommittee feels like a charter amendment recommendation should be on the agenda. And I'm not asking every individual whether or not I'm not like I want to be careful. I don't want to suggest we're asking every individual whether or not they should. We're asking within the confines of your subcommittee. Do the topics in your subcommittee, would that be impacted positively by a charter amendment recommendation? And so I'm going to do a quick report out for you all. And I think tomorrow I'm going to try to have some limited time on the full agenda to talk about this. We have a packed agenda tomorrow, but I know this is a very time sensitive issue too. So we'll be mostly talking about charter amendment recommendation and then also like what this subcommittee, how the subcommittee operates within that like paradigm. And then afterwards we'll, think about next steps too. Are there anything else that you all want to like make sure is on the agenda for today?
When we're talking about timeline, saying like, oh, we want to get it done in the next 3 meetings, it would be helpful for me also to be able to share what kind of information that I would need to make informed decisions. I can't remember. I know we talked about it briefly last time, but I think we should just reiterate. And I'm sure you shared this with us because I have a lot of emails from you, but do we have notes from our first meeting?
So what we do is, you mean for the first subcommittee meeting?
Yeah, sorry, the subcommittee
Yeah.
meeting, yes.
Yeah, so what we do is we just record these, uh, and then we, provide the recordings out. So, I can drop a link in the chat here too, but in the last email I sent out, we have a central web page where we have all of the committee recordings in one place too. So yeah, I think we would have the very first meeting in there as well.
Okay, that's helpful. I think, that's great for transparency and access for other folks, but it would be really great if after every subcommittee meeting, we were clear on the next steps, the deliverables, like, not verbatim notes, but just so we're tracking, like if we've asked you to get some information, just so I'm not asking you 3 times.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I do keep informal notes, but I can absolutely send something out to you all that just has it all in one place. Is that what you're asking for?
Yeah, that would be helpful for me for tracking purposes because
Okay.
honestly, I don't remember often from one meeting to the next because I talk about this stuff a lot.
No worries. Yeah, let me just make a note of that and then I will make sure to follow up with that. Okay, thank you. Anything else that you all want to add onto the agenda today? Okay. Well then diving in, I think is it most helpful for me to do a little report back on the conversation with the other subcommittees about the charter amendment? Is that the best way to start this conversation, or do you all want like a recap of what the constrictions were? Okay. Well, been in conversations with 3 of the 4 subcommittees of violations and penalty subcommittee had to reschedule due to like a scheduling conflict with one of the members. But the contribution and spending limits subcommittee, I think feels much the same way you all do, which is that, and I don't want to like overgeneralize there. So, but what they have said is that they feel that the charter amendment is too constrictive on the ability to set contribution limits as well. And so that subcommittee is also interested in a conversation around recommending an amendment to the charter. We haven't talked about spending restrictions yet, as in like what can you spend matching funds on? That's a component of almost every single program. And that's not something that this subcommittee has gotten into yet. But also the charter amendment doesn't really talk about spending restrictions in terms of like what you can spend matching funds on. So I don't foresee I don't think there's any reason to foresee that the charter amendment would constrict their ability to set those limits in place. But in terms of contribution limits, definitely an interest from that subcommittee to explore this conversation more. From the oversight perspective, we talked about it in our programmatic oversight subcommittee. The charter amendment doesn't get into a lot of depth, or actually doesn't really cover anything to do with the programmatic oversight. Whether or not whether or not you all recommend that there be like a volunteer body that oversees the program going forward, and what the restrictions are within the volunteer body. You have wide latitude to do that as long as it falls within the best existing practices of the city and other laws that would impact this too. There are other parts of the charter that do clarify roles and responsibilities around like what the county board can do and also their ability to like delegate administrative rulemaking. But that is not part of the same charter amendment that we've been talking about this whole time. So the subcommittee didn't really make a firm decision one way or the other about whether or not they wanted, whether or not their subcommittee was recommending a charter amendment discussion. Those individuals might have their own feelings about it based on the other parts of the program that we're building here. But on that part, they did not have a strong opinion one way or the other. So the tally is 3 subcommittees were had these conversations. 2 of them felt that the full IAC should take up or should include on the agenda a conversation around amending the charter. Do we have questions about that?
I do. I'm interested in if you have a sense of what oh, sorry, Felisa, did I cut you off? Okay. Do you have a sense of what the contribution limits, like subcommittee, what their kind of, I don't know, interest is or what their goal is in changing the charter? Because I mean, presumably we're talking about participating candidates and the contributions that they can accept from others. And so I guess I'm trying to understand. So if, you know, they're kind of picturing, oh, it's really important for participating candidates to be able to accept more than the $600 or whatever, what, you know, populations they're wanting that for participating candidates.
Yeah, I don't want to presuppose them too much, and I think maybe tomorrow I'm going to ask the members if they could provide a short synopsis of what their feelings are on this topic too. I will say that um, those members felt that the contribution limits were low and were difficult to run under, even with matching funds provided, and so there was an interest in flexibility in terms of being able to raise the contribution limits. I think they were also looking at it from a perspective of, organizations that represent, hundreds or thousands of everyday people living in Multnomah County, whether or not those organizations could be allowed to give larger amounts because, of course, they're representing, significantly sized communities, I should say. So that's what I have so far, but I think tomorrow I'm gonna ask them to speak more directly to that too, because I don't want to presuppose what they're saying.
Okay.
Okay. So I think that now that we've done a report out on what the subcommittees are saying, this subcommittee has now had time to think a little bit more about the conversations we've had so far, and has had time to incorporate in information from our last full IAC meeting and also from those report backs. So that I just gave. So if we could spend some time talking about whether we think a charter amendment would be necessary for this subcommittee to take on, and also if it is, does this subcommittee want to continue to do work to build an in-kind contribution policy should there be a charter amendment that passes too? So those are some complex questions, but I think why don't we start with just revisiting where we were last time. Nothing might have changed for you all, but just felt we at least sent ground this conversation and what we're all feeling about a charter amendment recommendation.
So go ahead, Becky.
Picking up where
Sorry.
we left off, what is the question? We're validating that yes, we need and are interested in a charter amendment around in-kinds. I heard you say that all the other work groups are also interested in charter amendments. This isn't specific to our work, but what would be really helpful for me is some type of, I don't know, table or side by side of saying this is what's in the charter in kinds, this is what's in the charter in that impacts limits, this is what's in the charter, so we know holistically what we need. And then you want us to move into conversation around substantively what we think the charter amendment around in-kind should be, or the portion of it, or are we
Yeah, or at
doing
least
substance right now?
Yeah, well, I think what the core guiding, we don't have to have the substance all written out, but what the core guiding lights are for us on this topic. So that way we at least know we're all working from. And then I think the next part of the conversation will be what does that mean for this in-kind subcommittee? Because does this in-kind subcommittee, does it turn into a subcommittee that focuses on a charter amendment language? Does it, continue its work in building out an in-kind contribution policy should the charter amendment change? So I think having a kind of a broader meta conversation about what the subcommittee would, how it would like to proceed to would be the next part of it. But yeah, let's start with we talked about the value of whether or not a charter amendment would be necessary, or would you want to recommend amending the charter? And so my question to you all is, do you all still feel that way? And if so, are there any nuances or any new things that you want to add to that?
Well, I guess my understanding of kind of where we left things last time was I certainly hadn't kind of taken a substantive position on that the charter should be changed. And I, still am kind of agnostic about that. And if we're going to recommend something like that, I feel like we should have some public engagement before that. I mean, the charter amendment was passed by like 80+% of voters. Like, it seems weird for 10 people who are, many of whom are kind of involved in politics and running campaigns to say, oh, without hearing from anybody, this is what we think the right thing to do is. So I am gonna leave open, like, I don't know about the charter thing. I thought where we landed last time was unless there is a charter amendment, there's nothing for this subcommittee to do because, like if the limits are still going to be, sorry, can you give me the right number so I'm not just saying 600 some odd dollars, but if the
603.
Okay, so if the limits are 603 and that's just true across the board, we were not picturing that the in-kind, limits would be any lower than that. So there was nothing for us to do. If entities want to contribute, in kind as opposed to direct cash contributions up to $603, we don't care. There's nothing for us to do. It was only if it does turn out that there's interest in doing a change to the charter, and I guess that charter change is of the magnitude that we would want to decrease the in-kind limits from whatever those new upper limits are set as. Then there would be something for our group, our subcommittee, to do. That's where I thought we left it.
Second, Felisa.
I agree with James that is where we left it. So I feel like you got sort of a sense from the rest of the committees, minus one that didn't meet, that they thought that there should be a charter change. So then I feel like if there is a charter, if that is the sort of broader consensus of the group, then I thought we were going to have this meeting to discuss, I think to your next point, what we think the in-kind should be in that charter change.
Okay.
So that's why I thought we were here at this meeting right now.
Okay.
Otherwise, we weren't going to meet at all.
Yeah, I think we definitely have time on the agenda to talk about that. I thought like, given that the last time we met was like several weeks ago and we've had a lot of report backs and I wanted to check in with everyone and make sure that they still felt the same or if they, their thinking has changed at all on this before proceeding. Becca, do you have any thoughts on that?
Just to round it out, I think my understanding was the same as James and Felisa, which is there's no use in us meeting unless we have something substantive to do. My understanding was this meeting was going to be if there is a charter change, and my question to you, James, is are you comfortable with this? Because we had talked about like plan A, plan B, right? So if if the full committee agrees that we want to move forward with a charter change, then we should have a substantive conversation about what that policy should be. It doesn't necessarily wed any of us to, saying that we want the charter change, but we can have that policy discussion. But then there's also plan B, which is no charter change because it's either not politically feasible or because there's, we want to pursue a preemption. Like there's plan B, which is if we were to change the charter, what would we want in-kind to look like? And then there's the other route, which is we don't need a charter change because it's going to be addressed in another way or it's not politically feasible.
Yeah, so I think before and like just to clarify.
Oh, I'm sorry. Before I
go ahead.
Just really quick, because I'll forget and it's important. I just wanted to validate what James said, which is I am curious about when we're going to build in stakeholder and community engagement into informing the process.
Yeah, great question. And so, we're actually letting the we're asking the chair's office to lead on the planning for that one too. And so we have a meeting with them next week to discuss this in greater depth too. We do want to make sure we're bringing in stakeholder feedback very soon, and there's community engagement too. We also have a budget to hold several community town halls throughout the county too over the next year. So there is a, I think like there is a desire and an interest to bring in more stakeholder feedback, and I think the desire and interest is to do it soon too. And so, okay, I think and just to clarify before, there's of the 4 subcommittees, only 2 have said that they want to continue with the conversation about recommending a charter amendment. I'm not saying the other 2 are against it. I'm just saying like of the 4 of the ones I've talked to, 2 have said that. So then I think before talking about anything substantive in terms of like the policy, the next question, which I want to bring to you all, is a little bit of a thorny one, and that's, if the charter amendment is changed, if there's a recommendation from here and a charter amendment is, passed by the county board and it is amended, the earliest that would be is November of this year. And that is right before the program is set to launch. And it is right at around the beginning when candidates running in the 2026 election cycle will begin to run. So the question is, if we, oh, go ahead.
So I guess I want to be super clear. I feel like there's a bunch of ifs that you just laid out in there. So the thing that is true is that it would happen in November. A charter amendment would have to go on the November ballot. Fine. It doesn't mean that it has to take effect before you do one election cycle in 2026. I think that's something that our committee could discuss. The fuller committee could discuss and would be part of the charter amendment. What I would like to spend our time here doing is to actually talking about where we think the in-kind should land if we did do a charter amendment, as opposed to what ifing our way through a charter amendment, and just focus on what this committee's charge is.
Okay. Do others feel comfortable with that conversation proceeding? Okay, great. Then yeah, let's go with that. I think if we look at the in-kind donation fact sheet that I have sent you all included in there, it does have kind of a rundown of how other localities have in-kind donation limits that can kind of help that can help be a resource for you all to look at as we continue this conversation. And I also have the ORS language in there too. And then of course I think I have I have the ORS language, and I have like what other localities do, and also what Portland's Small Donor Elections Program, how they approach in-kind donation limits too. And then of course like we have like a summation of the charter limits as well. And the key points from the last time we met to discuss like this depth of policy too. Going forward go ahead.
I just have a information request when I'm looking at your fact sheet. There's a couple of things that are missing for me. Is one, the current language in this that you included does not include like the in-kind of 12 months of FTE for state legislative, which would be local races like this. So, and then the second question I have is, it does include Portland, but what it doesn't offer is there's language in statute and there's language in code, but then there's also like the Secretary of State is going through rulemaking, the City of Portland's advisory commission changes in kind, either interpretation of democracy activity or the limit. And so that what I'd love is also to say, this is what's in state statute, and then this is what is subject to adjustment through rulemaking or action of an advisory body. because I know we had talked about one of the points of interest is as much alignment as possible with either one or the other. And it's hard to have the conversation around full alignment when I'm unclear on what is like binding in statute and what could adjust or be reinterpreted.
Okay. Okay, gotcha. I will follow with that information. So to kind of dig into the policy side of this, and that being said, Becca, I hear that point too. Is the best way to proceed with this conversation if we're talking about substance? Do you all want to start by looking at how Portland runs their program and then offering like feedback or critiques on that? Because if part of the goal is alignment, it might be helpful to like start by to just kick off this conversation by looking at what the other program in the area does and where we think where we think they're doing things right and where we think they're doing things wrong. Is that a good way to kick off this conversation, or do you all want to start by talking about what are the core like must-haves that we all have for a policy like this?
Yes, I don't know. I'm interested in the latter. I would love to understand from my colleagues what kind of they're picturing or like what their ideal would be around like a in-kind regime for participating candidates, I guess.
Okay. Does anyone want to go first?
I'm fine. I feel like I've been super clear that I would like to align it with the state language. That's I just think one set of rules is my preference.
And I am the difference between Portland, the fundamental difference between Portland and the state statute is a cash limit versus an FTE equivalent. What I'm unclear on is the things that are allowable under, either one of those limits. For the city of Portland, it's democracy activities. In statute, it's essentially defined very similarly. So there's one, like, what are the activities, and two, what are the limits? Is it money or time? But of course, time is associated with money. And that would help me. And, I will be very clear, like, consistency is key for me. I don't know at this point if I have a huge preference over one or the other. I know a lot about the city of Portland, but I wasn't engaged in any of the conversations that included a lot of stakeholders for the state statute change.
I'm kind of remembering now, thanks for spend a few weeks on this. I'm kind of remembering, didn't we, Felisa, weren't you gonna ask Scott for some clarification on the state stuff?
I asked Scott for clarification on the small donor committees, yeah. And so
did we hear back?
I have that clarification. Came back last week. But it's about the small donor committees. It's not about in-kinds. So do you want me to tell you what, or can we focus on in-kinds, and I can ask Scott if I can I didn't ask Scott if I could email this out.
And I think
Which
you're
I have
not
to
allowed
do.
to email it to me anyway. But but okay. Sure. I guess so. I just want to then understand. So Felisa, when you say in lining it up with the state limits, your picture. So I guess I just want to be clear about what we're talking about. So you're thinking for a county officer candidate, so somebody running for Multnomah County Commission who's participating in the small donor elections program, that they would be allowed to accept a year of staff time from an organization?
or the equivalent. So
Right.
a membership organization may make an in-kind, and only membership organizations. So similarly to, I'm looking at sorry, I'm like flip it. WebEx is rough, so it's hard to flip around between the different things.
Sure.
So it's like it's sort of similar to the small donor in the organizations of the 10,000, but democracy building activities are excluded in this 10,000, right?
Well, so
So
sorry.
like, but
I'm thinking when I think of sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
I think democracy building activities are actually defined list. Yeah, I like this.
Oh shoot, Felicia,
Direct
you
voter.
broken up. I think at least I missed most of the last what you said. Shoot.
Sorry,
Oh,
I don't
hey,
know.
hey, Felicia, I might have to ask you to say that again because you cut out for a good portion of what you just said.
Question
Oh shoot.
instead.
I'm having a difficult time hearing Felisa.
Yep.
Okay. While we wait for Felicia to come back, if it's helpful, Becca, I want to make sure I didn't misinterpret your question earlier, but I'm happy to run through like the details of the city of Portland's in-kind donation limit, particularly about like democracy building activities and how those are defined too, if you think that's necessary. But if you don't, of course I don't have to.
I mean, it would be helpful for me, but honestly, in the bucket of comparing it to what the state statute says, I think that would be if
Okay.
you have both sets of information, that it'd be like, hey, here's the language in the city charter around this. Here's the language in the state statute. Here's the stuff that is interpretable. That sounds like a funny word. Through administrative rule.
Okay, I got it. I got what you're asking for. Okay.
Yeah, that seems helpful.
Yeah, Felicia, you sound like yeah, I think we might have you back online.
I'm doing my best. I think my challenge is if I am on WebEx, then I can't, for some reason, open anything else on my computer. So I can't look at the other stuff.
Mm.
So that is a problem. So there was a question about. Can you just repeat the question you asked, James?
Well, I had kind of several, but one thing, I mean, in my mind, democracy building activities, is typically kind of candidate advocacy. And that stuff I feel comfortable with, like, relatively high levels. I guess I personally feel like for someone accepting minimum number small donations from the public, which I don't know where it will land, but we know for sure that it'll be less than 600 or at or less than $603, presumably less, because normally the bargain for being in a publicly financing program is that you're going to take smaller donations than non-participating candidates would take, and in exchange for that you're getting some public funding. And so in a world where people are only allowed to take, even at the maximum $603, I don't know, it would give me heartburn to think that they're going to accept, $100,000 or whatever, like 12 months of full-time staff, with benefits is worth from a single, membership I mean, it feels like at that point, basically it's just membership organizations. Like, why get donations at all? Just go to the handful of membership organizations that will offer that kind of staff support. And that's enough to run a campaign. So I don't know. I mean, I guess my sense is it kind of undercuts the purpose of the program, I guess, to allow staff support at that level, especially for, I mean, historically, and maybe times are changing, but historically these Multnomah County, seats have not seen that kind of investment.
I guess to your point, then what makes you think that an organization would give them a full-time staff person? Like, I think to your point, like, what if historically, even when we didn't have limits, even if you go back before to, pre the charter reform, what were the investments in the campaigns? Like, why do you think that would change then?
It's a good question. I guess from my perspective, it's both like it's not just the reality, but also the appearance. I mean, if candidates are unclear how much like an organization might be able to give them, but it could be a lot, and they know for sure how much individuals can give them, which is $603 or less, whatever we determine for participating candidates, it feels like a big incentive to lean into whatever friendly organizations and put a hard ask to them of like, can you, whatever, give me, I mean, even somebody working, less than 12 months FTE or equivalent could still be a huge amount of money, tens of thousands of dollars, which I do think historically, like folks have contributed that kind of money. And I don't know, it just seems like a lot compared to if this is supposed to be a, small donor program, and that's the intent.
Can I get some clarity from you, Daniel? For the city of Portland, currently it's $10,000 for democracy activities. Is it only anyone can do that? I say with a question mark, or is it only organizations? Or could
So
I, as a private, community member, dedicate $10,000 of democracy activity? I can't
it's a
remember
little
if it was
complex.
limited to organizations.
The short answer is no, it's not for individuals. Individuals can give in-kind donations, but they're limited up to 350, the same limit that they are for cash donations under the program. Organizations can give in-kind donations of up to $10,000. Any kind of organization that's allowed to give these, that is allowed to give the candidates, or most organizations, I should say, are allowed to give up to $10,000 for democracy building activities. So kind of a broad bucket of organizations can give up to 10K for democracy building activities. Small donor organizations can give $10,000 for most other activities too. But they have to be an SDO in order to give, for a democracy building activity, if that makes sense too.
Maybe I do need some clarity on what we mean then. What is a democracy building activity that would count as a candidate contribution?
Yeah, so the city, are you talking about for the city?
Yeah.
Yeah. For the city, there are several enumerated ones, particularly in the law too. And so, so like those would include, anything like a canvas or a phone bank that are bringing more people directly into democracy counts, and as well as like supplying the supplies and materials required for that. So if you do like a phone bank, you can also provide the phones in the office space. So that includes democracy building activity. There's also $10,000 worth of campaign planning that counts as a DBA. And there is also security, like it's kind of a broader bucket, but like security planning can also be involved in the DBA too. But the core of it is for things that are just going to bring more people in. So like it's really meant to be about canvassing and phone banking, but there are other enumerated activities too. But for instance, it definitely excludes things like advertising. That would not be a part of a democracy building activity.
Thanks. Super helpful.
Sure.
And so there may be some nuance between the state statute and city code about what's enumerated or, what's through rule, but generally for the purpose of functionality, it's the same kind of activity. Like if staff were to in-kind to an organization or they'd be organizing volunteers for a canvas, under the state statute. The $10,000 limit, that's adjustable by the advisory council, right? That is not in code. Because there was some conversation that they were going to do that last year, is raise the limit.
There was some conversation they were going to do it last year, especially because the program was not fully funded last year too. So I don't want to give you the wrong answer on this. So let me double check on that one about whether that's an admin rule or whether or not it's in city code.
That's my recollection, Becca, is that it's something that the IAC can mess or can change.
Yeah. Well, and I'd also
And then
love to know. Oh, go ahead.
One of the state is clarifying that this in-kind contribution limit will apply to local governments too. That it's not just for state offices. That was agreed upon as part of the bill.
Okay.
You mean they're clarifying, like right now it's unclear in statute, but they're looking to clarify. Okay, got it.
Yeah, they're looking to clarify.
That's good to know. Daniel, when you also look to clarify how the $10,000 can be adjusted, is there historical data of the last couple of cycles about who has engaged in democracy building activity at the city level, and have they reached the threshold? I'm just curious. I mean, I know folks who did that work last year, but I don't know beyond last year.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Adjusted admin. So I think with the $10,000 and with the in-kind donation limits, I will tell you that there were organizations that gave in-kind donations, of course, in 2024 election, but very few, if any, actually applied to officially become a small donor organization. The program at the city had a process for reviewing, and kind of like certifying, if you will, or designating SDOs, and I don't think it did at all in the 2024 election. And part of the feedback we got to a lot of organizations felt it was just so complicated to walk through the in-kind donation rules at the city that very few of them actually went through the whole process too. But there were certainly in-kind donations that did occur. The rules have changed, and so initially, organizations, I believe, were allowed to give just kind of a flat amount, kind of regardless of whether or not they were an SDO or non-SDO. Like the SDO designation is relatively new to the city code. Beforehand, most organizations were allowed to give, I think, up to $20,000. But the candidate was only allowed to accept up to $20K. So like if one organization came in and gave all that $20K, that's the most the candidate could receive for the rest of the race too. So there was a little bit of a simpler process in the early days of the program, and then of course the rules were revised. Eventually they were changed to $5,000 per organization, but then with the move to a single November election, they were changed to $10,000 per organization too. But the point is, again, the rules were a little complicated last time, so a lot of organizations decided not to go through in-kind donations, or at least they didn't report in-kind donations, I should say.
But so I heard in Becca's question, which would be interesting to me, is to see, especially I guess in the 24 city elections, like how much, you know, like how many in-kind contributions were there? I mean, I don't need like every single way of cutting this, but like some kind of indication of like how many organizations used in-kind contributions and how much, you know, on average did they give? Were there entities that hit the $10,000 limit or not? That seems kind of helpful if we're considering like where we would put a limit, a potential limit. And I do hear, you know, Felisa's, you know, interested in the state limit, which is obviously different. But for me anyway, it would be helpful to kind of have a sense of how it was actually used at the city.
Sure. Okay.
And just to clarify, the City of Portland in-kind for democracy activities is only available to candidates who are in the small donor. You cannot in-kind to a candidate who's not in small donor. Just further, okay.
Yeah, that's
Whereas
because the city.
yeah,
Sorry,
the state
interrupt.
statute, like if the state ledge limits applied to local government, that is anyone across the board, meaning you don't have to participate in a small donor as it's currently written.
Because there is no small donor at the statewide level.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, yeah, Felisa, if you do get the okay to share that LC opinion or at least like a summary of it, that would really help me in the process, like building out this legal analysis for you all too. Okay, so so I do owe you all that table for sure, and I will give you that like side-by-side comparison too. There is so Felisa, you're talking about like pegging this much more to like the state's you know, in-kind donation policy. Are there specific points or values that like really stand out to you as being important to bring in? Like, is it simple? Is it easy to navigate? You know, does it allow for a lot more flexibility? Like, what can I ask? Like, what are the things that particularly you value about how the state runs, how the state laws around this topic?
I value consistency, and I think that I in all of these I value consistency. So there's a lot. I will say that people don't use the City of Portland's in-kind limit because it is actually very confusing to use. So it is not that people don't want to, or people like, you have to be a small donor committee, or you have to prove that you're a membership committee, then you have to get certified, then you have to do the reporting, then the reporting, like, and it's all different than the state system. Versus the state system is like easy, it's much clearer, frankly. It's a lot clearer. And so I really value consistency across 3 of these programs. And I think if we really wanted to, like I believe we are probably a very sophisticated political organization. And if we really wanted to, we could figure it out. Like, I do not think that organizations who are smaller than ours can figure these things out. And the amount of money that we spend on legal fees, most organizations don't have. So their ability to like actually engage in these, so we can go back and look at like their engagement, they don't engage because the rules are too complicated and it puts a lot of their funding and engagement in jeopardy. So, and if the rules are too complicated, like they're too complicated for us.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that was definitely a piece of feedback that the city program had, was that the more complicated the rules are, the more of a barrier it access is, particularly the candidates who are running, you know, from, you know, communities who are giving smaller donations too. Like, they don't necessarily have the resources to hire, like, you know, legal counsel.
I also think we're talking about this as if all of the sort of activities and spending exist solely with candidates. It's like, no, it just pushes people into independent expenditures. And so there's not a reason to engage with candidates directly, which I actually think is a much more high functioning way to engage in our political system. It just moves people into independent expenditures. So the more complex it is, the more restrictive it is, the more rules are on it, the less people will participate directly with candidates. They will do independent expenditures, and they will be significantly less transparent.
Appreciate that. James, Becca, any reactions to that? Any, since we're talking about the state rules here.
I don't disagree with any of that in terms of, I mean, that was also firsthand experience last cycle and watching groups try to engage. It was incredibly complicated for the city to even take advantage or of the in-kind ability. And to Felisa's point, it absolutely will move folks over to the independent expenditures and doesn't allow connection of community members directly to the candidate, right? So they don't get to canvass alongside the candidate and get to know them and share, their lived experience and policy ideas. So the more clearer, the more clarity we can bring to the process, I think, the better.
James, thoughts on that?
Well, I really resonate with the kind of first part of Felisa's statement. I mean, I think like everyone, I'm for like it needs to be really clear. And I think actually there's a tension for me around I want for programs for all government programs basically to be iterative and kind of like get better, learn from like what worked and didn't work and get better. But I actually kind of think that's part of the problem is like if the rules are changing every cycle, like it's hard for like organizations to normalize to like here's the way that we do it now. I mean, for former candidates or people advising candidates who persist like year after year, like it's hard to kind of track like how this cycle is different than last cycle. So I feel like stability is important in understanding. No surprise, like I think that the lower limits at the county are better than the much higher limits at the state, and I would not support like just especially for participating candidates who are going to potentially be getting a bunch of public funding, like adopting really high contribution limits. Like I would not be for that. And I think like while consistency is a really important, well, I think while people being able to understand how to work within the system, both candidates and organizations that want to be engaged in elections, I think it's really first importance for people to be able to know how to follow the rules. I do think to the extent that consistency helps with that, it's an important value, but I wouldn't put its intention to me, I wouldn't necessarily put it over like right sizing the system for the like size of engagement, the size of districts, the like amount that organizations typically engage or we think that they'll engage in the future. So in my mind, like the county will have lower limits than like seeking state office, where historically, because there's a lot more money involved. Sorry, what's
They're
that?
bigger seats. The county commission races are actually larger seats.
Totally understand that it's more voters.
So the voters there are significantly more voters in a county commission seat than there are in a state leg seat.
Yep, completely understand that.
Okay.
But there's also a lot less money historically spent on these county races than on, legislative races, and certainly on statewide races.
Yeah, I think that is a function of this is where I want to separate the in-kinds out. So I don't think we're going to agree here, and that's fine. But I just want to create real clarity about the in-kinds and what that is. Because like I think the staff time, like what people tend to spend a lot of money on when you look at the breakdown of where money is actually spent in a ledge race or even in a county commission race, it's on mail, digital buys, TV. That's where the large dollars are. and the knocking on people's doors, which I actually think is a core function of having a functioning democracy, is talking to each other and having, frankly, respectful debate. And the way that we do that is door to door and over the phone. You know, as like individuals, candidates obviously get to go on TV, they get to show up at forums, et cetera. But I feel like for me, that's not where the bulk of the money is spent. That's where the time and energy of people are spent. And the reality is how people engage in that have dramatically changed. And the county commission races are significantly larger for the number of voters than a state ledge race. So your ability to knock on all of your, it's almost impossible. A candidate themselves, in the amount of time that they run for election, is almost impossible to even knock on every door in a district.
Oh, not
Unlike a state,
possible, right?
unlike a state legislature. I think if you started running today for a county commission seat 4 years from now, and you knocked on doors every single day for 4 hours a day, you could do it. You could do it. Do I recommend that you do that? No. Is it a smart use of your time? No. But I bet you when you got to that county commission race, your likelihood of winning would be real fucking high because you knocked on everybody's door.
Maybe.
opponent-
Man, people are gonna remember from 4 years ago.
Your opponent wouldn't do it. And
Right.
you'll talk to 15% of the voters. If you did that, they will remember that you came to their door, but you'll have only talked to 15% of them. So I hear the points that you're making, and like I said, we don't have to agree here. Like I just don't I fundamentally don't agree with you on this particular issue around in-kinds. And to me, it is not about money. And I actually don't think it changes the calculus from organizations on what they give to these races. So as an organization that spends a lot of money on both, the calculus is not going to change for us based on these rules, how much we spend or don't spend, or how many people engage or don't engage in a county commission race. That is about our organization, not about these rules.
Right. But do you hear what I'm saying? As like a candidate, it changes your behavior to think, oh, there are entities in this system that could give me, 6 figures worth of effort. And there are other entities that can give me $600 worth of effort. Like, where am I going to try to lean in my time and energy?
Well, there are individuals that can give you $600 worth of effort. And there are entities with a lot of people that can give you $100,000 worth of effort. So your point in that is very important there. So an individual, you spend your time. I mean, this is why, frankly, like you spend your time talking to people who can give you $600. That's why nobody ever calls a single one of my members and asks them for money. They don't have $600 that they're giving to political candidates. Not going to happen, ever. They will spend time with that individual's union because that individual's union is made up of thousands of people who can collectively pool their resources. They'll spend time on Apano because Apano is made up and has a C4 of thousands of people who can collectively pool their resources. That is the fundamental difference. And if I were to say one of my core values is, I don't want a candidate spending a bunch of time with somebody who can write a check for $600. I would much rather have them spending a bunch of time with people who can collectively pool their resources and are much broader, even though maybe none of those people have $600.
I hear that. I think there are going to be membership organizations that are not made up of people who can't cut $600 checks. And there are going to be membership organizations that can spend huge amounts of money because their limited number of members have a lot of money. And it's not clear to me that like that's pro democracy. And I guess like I think these limits kind of have to, reflect the different style of groups that engage.
Well, I hate to step in because this is a really spirited debate. Also that we did have a hard stop at 1 p.m. too. If folks want to go longer, we can, but if folks
I
feel
don't
like we
want to
need,
go longer. I think we
okay.
don't agree. We're not going to get to agreement on these in-kind limits. I don't know if our goal is to work off consensus or if it is to make a decision. Like, I don't understand the setup of the subcommittees.
Yeah, I mean, I think, consensus if possible, but if not, the subcommittee, can strive to make a recommendation without it. If that's also not possible, the subcommittee can just report out and kind of give like a an analysis on like what are the different conversations they were having as well too. So I think it sounds like there is an interest in continuing to meet because sorry, Felicia, did you have another question?
I do. I feel like you just said something that I don't think is accurate. I feel like you said that there's an interest in continuing to meet, and I feel like we just have a fundamental disagreement that we're not going to get over, and that the point is the subcommittees will report out the discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't come to a recommendation without consensus. Is that what I heard you just say?
My understanding is that like a consensus is a good goal to strive for, but if not, then I think like the subcommittee needs to make a decision about whether or not they, if they have an odd number of people like you all do, if they want to just have like a vote and make a recommendation, or would they rather just report out on like what the conversations were and just get that over to the full committee?
Shit, it just froze.
I can still hear you though. Yeah.
I couldn't hear you. Sorry, could you finish what you were saying?
Yeah, so I think my understanding is that like full consensus is a good goal to achieve or strive for, but if you can't get to full consensus, then the subcommittee can make a choice about whether or not it just wants to take a vote if it has like an odd number of folks and make it and issue a recommendation, or if they would rather just like bring the the key points from the conversation for the full IAC to make a decision too.
I feel like that's an important piece for us to decide is how we want to make a recommendation, and then that will determine if we want to meet, because I don't feel like we're going to get to consensus.
Mm-hmm. Do folks have a few more minutes to discuss that?
Sure. A few more minutes. I mean, what are our options? If we're not going to get to consensus, we could take a vote and it could be, a recommendation from the majority of the committee. We could offer, here are a couple of options, and this is what each of us as individual committee members would recommend the full committee to do. Or what, disband and have no recommendation? I mean, I guess, what other option is there? It's either.
Yeah, and I guess I'm
Something.
unclear. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, Becca.
Oh, the only other thing I would say is I honestly feel like I need more information to even, I mean, I feel like I have a preference, but all of those questions that I asked you, Daniel, I think would be really helpful. And including, I'd like to dig in more to the state statute definition because, James, you keep saying that it's $100,000, worth of money. And most of these organizations do not pay their FTE $100,000, right? And so that, if we're looking for like a money equivalent, I feel like that is not an accurate reflection of who all would engage in the work. But I'd like more information of both systems and approaches.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I was wondering if it was a good idea to come back together, because I wanted to like give you this. I can email you all the information, but like if like after having this information, if you all want to collect it, like come together again and convene and talk about like what we have. And that's one of the reasons why I thought like maybe it would be smart to meet again.
I mean, I guess I have two things. Like, I'm interested in continuing this conversation, and I guess my read is a little bit different than Felisa. Like, I think Felisa and I have come at this with different perspectives, but it's not clear to me that there's not something that we would agree on as far as like recommendations. But I guess also it does feel like we could have a lot of like discussion here that's somewhat, well, I guess this feels like this decision feels like it's not needed immediately, right? Isn't the kind of thing that we need to focus on like what style of system and like how much, public funding like could potentially go to candidates? Isn't that the kind of like thing that the county needs like most quickly? And we have a little bit of more time on if there were, a charter amendment that allowed higher contributions, like what would we picture the in-kind contributions being in that system?
The most urgent thing is definitely the budget recommendation, and then tomorrow we'll also talk about method of distribution as well. You do have a little bit more time to like continue talking about in-kind donations. Of course, like the thing I would note is that, every other policy is impacted by, every policy is impacted by the other policies too. So like if you decide something in-kind donations, it might impact the conversation around contribution limits, for instance.
That makes
So
sense.
that's another thing to keep in mind too. You do have a little bit more time. Right? You do have like a couple more meetings if you want to keep holding meetings to like have these conversations and see see if you do find points of consensus. And even if you have like if you're coming from different perspectives, there might be points of agreement too. That might be worth like making an effort to find. And then once we get into like mid-March, that's when like the recommendations really do need to be solidified. So you do have a little bit more time, but it doesn't have to be something you have to like decide on today. Does that answer your question?
I think Can I just offer something in terms of clarity for the time? Because I don't know if we have a whole lot more time, right? If this recommendation intersects with the other recommendations, we have to be able to have that conversation as a full committee, and provide a recommendation to the board, because they'll want to, if they decide to, and we decide that's what we're offering, refer something to the ballot by July, right? So but if you could, again, maybe maybe it's just me as a linear thinker. We don't have a timeline as part of our committee's work, right? Like it would be really great if you could say by this date, we need to have these kinds of recommendations by this date. The subcommittees need to have their recommendations. And then on these dates, we will consider them as a full committee, because what you just said, Daniel, reminds me, where the limits folks land, I think will have a direct impact on how I feel in terms of what the in-kind donation approach will be.
Yeah, totally. I think tomorrow, that's why I'm going to budget some time in the full IAC agenda for different committees to report out like what they're thinking so far and where they're leaning. And like while those aren't full recommendations, it will give you a sense like where the conversations are going too. So I'd like to like bring that into every IAC meeting going forward. But yes, I hear that. And yeah, I can like put together like I can send you all like an official timeline, like when we need these sub recommendations for, when we need the full recommendations for too.
Sorry, I have a hard stop at 1:15 and I keep cutting in and out. So I'm literally gonna have to go back and rewatch this because I think people said some stuff to me and I literally have no idea what they said. So it's like unbelievably frustrating to me right now.
Sure.
And I've shut off everything. Like I literally shut off my phone so I could get on this situation. So
just apologies about that.
We decide are we meeting or not? That's I feel like I'm fuck. Is it not working?
No, I think
no,
it is. Everyone was just silent. I think I apologize if I'm putting words in your mouth, but I think Becca and I are interested in meeting again, at the very least, to hear back from Daniel on, his research. And then,
Okay.
I really think, Felisa, there's some things you and I could agree on. So I don't think it's wasted time for us to meet again.
Okay, send us a doodle, Daniel, or
doodle to find another time.
or should we schedule right now? Great about
that would be way easier if we could just schedule right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And apologies about WebEx, just the county dates we
I have
use
to turn
this.
on my phone, so hold on just a second, and then I might get cut out so I can schedule this. So sorry.
That's okay. I just put in the chat the link because I said I would do this earlier, the link for like where you can find the videos from the previous meetings too. And again, apologies for WebEx. The county does prefer us to use WebEx as a platform, but if it's such an issue, I can ask if like we can consider using, Google Meets or something like that too.
Okay, my phone's
Yeah, would you
on.
please ask that?
Sure. Yeah.
WebEx is not a preferred platform.
Yeah, I get that.
My phone's on. So do we want to meet?
What is your availability next week?
I could do Tuesday at 2:00.
Oof. I can do Tuesday at 2:00. I will be limited to exactly 1 hour, which is fine.
Works.
Um,
That works for you. I could also start at 1:30.
no,
If that
I only
makes
have
sense.
that 2 to 3 window.
Okay.
My best I mean, I guess if let's just book that, I guess if that works for everybody. We'll just do 1
No,
hour.
you have another.
I
a
mean,
different suggestion?
my best availability would be Friday afternoon, or I mean Friday like anytime after noon. Friday the 21st, but
Unfortunately, I'm booked until like 4:00 on Friday, which would make us all
that's a hard thing.
miserable. So
Is Thursday available for anyone? Since that's the time we've been historically meeting.
I
Yeah.
could do 11 to 12 or 4 to 5 on Thursday.
my only time is 8:00 in the morning on Thursday.
No, thank you.
Otherwise, I'm driving or in meetings. So, but I could do the
Tuesday
the
at
following
2
week.
seems like that works. Oh yeah.
Oh no, the following week is actually worse for me. Sorry.
Okay. So it sounds like Tuesday at 2 is our thing. Daniel, does that give you enough time?
Yeah. And I apologize. I know we talked about this like table of legal research for you all. I've been like very immersed in budget. But I know it's been requested of us, and so I will aim to have that for you before Tuesday.
Okay, and can you email out the link that you put in the chat? I'm afraid if I open it, I will freeze again and get kicked out
Sure.
of this.
Totally. And I'm going to send out kind of like a rundown of what we agreed to on research as well. If you have any things you want me to add, please feel free to respond to that email.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all.
All right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Take care.